Yes.
All right, before we get started, as I usually do, if you have a cell phone, please either silence it or turn it off.
Not how many.
You're in that closet.
As soon as staff is ready, we'll start. There you go. Okay. I will call the regular meeting of the Oregon City Commission to order for Wednesday, January 16th, 2019. I'm on the wrong page here. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Nancy Ide. Here. Commissioner Rachel Lyles Smith. Here. Commissioner Mayor Holiday. Mayor Holiday.
It's like the old corporal captain for Matt.
Demoted.
So if you please stand and join me in flag salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, under ceremonies, proclamations, presentations, we have 19-031, Public Works CCTV Inspection Team receives the APWA Award, Everyday Heroes Recognition Award, and following my own rules, the American Public Works Association, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, there you go.
So I thought we were doing citizen comment first, so I got to get my guys in here because they're out there setting up chairs right now for people in the
Well,
audience. So
the agenda is the agenda.
yeah, come on in, guys. Sorry, I messed that up somehow. So we've got a handful of folks in here, and I'm glad to see that we have such a lively audience to congratulate them on their award.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure they're all here for you, John.
One way or the other, they're here. So I guess, yeah, let me flip to that item real quick. So we've got a group of our closed circuit TV camera crew here who won an award at the American Public Works Association conference this last year for all their good work on TV inspection and high pressure cleaning in the system. And you know, that's the program that we have is a mature program. It's happened over years of service, and I think there's been a lot of decisions. I didn't count them all, but between city commission decisions on staffing, city commission decisions on equipment acquisitions, we've made this program into what it is today. And these guys have covered, Eric's got some stats. I don't know if he's going to be able to go through those for us, but some of the statistics on that, but they were honored because of what a great job they've done in Oregon City. Keeping track of what our underground pipelines look like and the condition of those pipelines. And we're documenting that both in a video format or a data format, but we're also creating work orders and condition assessments of our pipeline. And all that will come together with a lot of the work that we've been doing with flow monitoring and smoke testing. So Eric, do you want to do a quick update into the microphone there? Let them know who you are and who your team is.
So is this active then?
Oh, you have a seat here.
Okay. Well, I'll try and keep it brief because it looks like we have a full house. I just want to thank Mayor Holiday and all of our current and past city commissioners who have continued to support Public Works and our video inspection program. Some of you may recall a couple years ago, we purchased a Q's video inspection system that included a TV truck, all the software, a camera and tractor capable of video inspecting 6-inch to 36 diameter pipe, a push camera for smaller diameter pipes, a pull camera for manhole inspection and detention pipes, and then the second phase of that was a lateral launch camera, which allows us to video inspect sewer mains and laterals from the city sewer main to the edge of the right-of-way and further if needed. And we utilize that specialized camera for roadway projects and customer service work. Some of the defects they observe are obviously cracked and broken pipe. We find utility bore-throughs from time to time, protruding taps, root intrusion, leaks and other inflow and infiltration issues. But most of all, we're here to honor these three gentlemen behind me, recognize their achievement. In 2017 and 18, they video inspected over 52 miles of sewer and stormwater pipe. And for that, I'm extremely proud and extremely grateful. In 2018-19, we're again on schedule to exceed our video inspection goals. And with that, is there any questions anybody may have?
Can I introduce the team to you? Eric Handis, the wastewater stormwater manager for the group, and we've got Greg Brittle right here, Patrick Armstrong next, and Chuck Finnegan and beyond. And if they're not in the TV van, they're in the high pressure cleaner. They're doing hard work every day. So, and with that, one other introduction at the back of the room, Vance Walker is our new Assistant Public Works Director. I asked him to show up as well. So many of you haven't met him, but he's filling in at the Operations Center. So he's taking the lead out there.
Where did he come from?
Vance came from many years of service with the city of Tigard, 12 years of service with Tigard, and before that, 4 years with the city of Lake Oswego. And he's been around Public Works for a long time, so I think he's going to do a great job for us, and he's got his hands full.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Well, on behalf of the City Commission, I want to say thanks for all the hard work you guys do. I know that I've been out a couple of times on different scenes, and everybody's always out there getting the work done. And unlike some folks at state, when I go out and see our guys, almost all of them are working, not standing around looking at one guy in a hole with a shovel. So thanks for all your hard work.
I had occasion to meet a couple of these gentlemen in performance of their duties, and I'll tell you, they were professional and courteous, and they're a real asset to the city, and we're proud to have them. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. And thanks to each of you for your continued support.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to citizen comment. Obviously, it's pretty clear to all of us, we know why most of you are here. I'm going to, although I'm not required to because this is not a public hearing, I will give 5 minutes each to any senior neighborhood representative. So I assume we have McLaughlin and Rivercrest here. Or is there any other neighborhood that wants to speak on this issue? Okay. So, and then I'm going to limit comments to 2 minutes for additional folks that want to talk. I would ask that you try to not be repetitive. We've all read the comments that we've gotten via email and that have been submitted to the city recorder. So there's a bunch of people in the crowd. We have a fairly long agenda after this. So if you could try not to repeat each other, certainly we would appreciate it. And with that, I want to go with the neighborhood reps first. So Mr. Lindquist, are you the neighborhood rep for Rivercrest?
Yes.
And is there a neighborhood rep for McLaughlin here?
I'm chair, but I'll be here just as a private citizen.
Okay, so nobody's wanting to speak on behalf of the McLaughlin neighborhood.
Well, we haven't, the steering committee hasn't discussed the issue.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Mr. Lindquist?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the City Council, my name is Ed Lindquist, 111 Ogden Drive, Oregon City, Oregon. I'm chair of the Rivercrest Neighborhood Association, and we've had a particular problem up there with the viewpoint on Creed Street. And we've been working with the police department and several other city agencies trying to find an answer for the problem. The problem has gotten worse over the last 2 years, almost 2 years. And first of all, I want to say we really appreciate the police department. They've done everything they can, and we appreciate the work they've done. Their hands are kind of tied, and so we're trying to find other ways to answer this problem. So that's what some of the information that we've given you. I would like to, first of all, say that I'm not going to get into the issue as much. I appointed a subcommittee, and Jeff and Jill Jones are the co-chairs of that committee, and I'd like them to kind of be the major ones to speak because they put all the information together. I want to say thank you to Chris with the police department. She's gotten us the information about the calls that we've gotten to that spot and how they've increased over the last couple of years. Mainly for your information, we also have a group of pictures. I'm not sure if you got the pictures or not. You did with your packets,
did,
great,
yeah.
because the pictures really tell a lot of the story. With that, I'd really like to bring those two co-chairs up, the Jones, if I could. And let me just say that the chair of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Group was informed, but they didn't have time to get it to a meeting.
Right.
So that's why he's not representing the whole McLaughlin Group.
Okay, so Jeff Jones, is there another Jones?
Yes, my wife, she's going to sit back there.
Okay,
I've put some words together here, and I will just, I will present them. So my name is Jeff Jones, and I live on Brighton Avenue, 810, just down the street from the Creed Street Viewpoint, which is the reason we're here. It's also called the Bluff. Some people refer to it as the Bluff. And it sounds like you have seen the material that we put together in regards to this. You know, I'd like to just say that when you live near a popular public place on a park, it's a two-edged sword. You get to enjoy the place by being nearby it, but you have to share it. And the Bluff is a real special place. If you've been there, you know it is. It's got an amazing view. It's got trails that go through the adjacent Waterboard Park, the neighborhoods below. Unfortunately, that we're sharing this place with some folks that have found and discovered this place. Many of these people have been found not even to be residents of Oregon City from various data that I've gotten, from information I've gotten from Officer Willard, who has done some vehicle stops for traffic infractions. And the things that we witnessed by walking through there are large groups of people congregating at times, lots of cars, sometimes up to 6, more than that. And they're not there for the view. We've seen a lot of drug activity. There has been a lot of speeding. We see several of the same cars go racing by 3 or 4 times a day, doing very short stops at the place, at the viewpoint. And you know, when we were all kids once, and we've all hung out in places that we did things maybe our parents wouldn't approve of. But I don't know about you, we tend to do it not in a neighborhood. The viewpoint has become a destination and a hangout for folks that, to the most part, do not appear to be from our community. They intimidate us with their behavior to the degree that we feel threatened and not safe. The cars racing up down the street, we got children that live here, and there have been assaults. There have been some of the people who live nearby the Bluff have been threatened. And threatened so much that, you know, we circulated a petition in through the neighborhood to ask the city to address these concerns. Gathered over 100 signatures. I have them right here. However, due to fear by a few who signed the petition, a potential public, because it would be part of public record, they are in fear of retaliation. That kind of tells you something. So we're not going to submit them today. But I will read what I'll paraphrase it for brevity purposes, that on the petition that they sign, we state, we the undersigned request that the Bluff be closed temporarily until the Oregon City Parks, Oregon City Public Works Department, and the Rivercrest community meet in a work group to come to an agreement to what needs to be done to eliminate the continued criminal and illegal activity occurring daily at the Bluff, and I mean daily and nightly. It is acknowledged that this may require changing city ordinance to modify the Bluff's jurisdictional status, which we know, of course, is public right of way. It's not part of the parks. We understand that. Whatever decisions are made from the work group, we request that the city take the steps necessary to accomplish the agreed upon changes. So we are willing to work together. And I would like to also thank the police department for their efforts and hope that we can move forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can add to that, Mr. Mayor, that our main purpose in handing these out and getting them signed by people is to get action from the city. It doesn't have to be this particular thing. As long as we get action, that's what we're really asking for, and to bring it to you and say, how can we solve this problem?
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, sir. So as we move on, 2 minutes, Katie.
Okay.
So next up, I have Patty Epperson and Larson Elaine. Ms. Epperson?
Okay, I'm Patty Epperson, and I live right at Creed and Promontory where all the action happens. I see it all day, I see it all night. If you don't see it in 5 minutes, wait, it'll show up. And I don't want to repeat, but we have the loud music yelling. It's all obscene, and the speeding, and everybody else gets the speeding. Cars literally going sideways up Creed Street to the stop sign. And again, threatening neighbors and calling names and vandalizing. The gentleman up the street was broken into. He has them on camera. He has them assaulting him, threatening him, breaking into his house, wearing the things that they stole from him. He has a case number, and nobody has done anything about it. He's from Southeast Portland. He came here to get away from that. He's moving back to Southeast Portland because they actually do something about it. We have all those signs. And at 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm looking out my balcony, and we have noise that they've woken me up yet again, because it's almost every night. And the officers shine their flashlight on 7 different signs that apparently these drivers can't see or don't read. And everybody goes on their merry way. There's no ticketing, there's no consequence. And it's so ingrained now after over 2.5 years that we kind of need to do something. And whether it's blocking it off or speed bumps on every artery in Jersey, Brighton, Creed, Summit, McKinley, to slow them down. But my fear is, I'm not going to say it's my fear, but a concern that I have is, if the signs don't do anything now because they're not enforced, more signs, if we go to a walking park, no parking, that has to be enforced as well. And if you can post all the signs you want to, but if we're not going to enforce them, it's going to do no good.
Thank you, ma'am.
And so, yeah.
Ms. Elaine?
Hi, I just moved to the neighborhood about a year ago.
Name?
Elaine Larson. I live on Jersey.
Okay, thank you.
And the traffic has been extremely bad, and they zip by all the time, all hours. My son walked by and he said that he saw a drug deal. He freaked out. People have been screaming at him. I've been through this before in Park Place. It took me 16 years to fight a drug house. They finally brought in Clackamas County Drug Enforcement and the Oregon City PD. They took him out. They were out of jail within 3 hours, but they caught the guy 3 months later, and he went to jail for 3 years. We sold and left, and now the neighborhood is clean, and there's no problems. We brought in code enforcement too, because it was extremely bad. And I hate to see this happen here.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, Johnny Miller and Carol Marl.
Hi, I'm Johnny Miller. I live also on the bluff Creed is right behind my house. We wake up at all hours of the morning. In fact, on the New Year's Eve, we had mortars going off at the bluff. and there's not supposed to be anybody over there. They exceptionalize that for, 4th of July, which is understandable. There's children that live there. There's 5 kids that live next door. I know that there's drugs running over there because I work out my yard quite frequently. I can monitor the cars. I know what's happening when they go in there. 5 minutes later, they leave. Where there's drugs, there's going to be guns. I don't want to see anybody killed on my bluff, on my watch, in my neighborhood, especially the children. And it upsets all of us. It's discouraging. You don't want to walk over there. You don't want to live there anymore because of, and we pay taxes. We should be able to enjoy it. It is such a beautiful place. But we have kids that come down our street and hide down there's a little embankment there. I know that those kids are underage and they're smoking pot. You don't even have to smoke pot. You just step out on my porch. It's so pungent. It's that bad. So it's a concern.
Hi, I'm Carol Marl, and I live at 611 Brighton Avenue. And I grew up in that neighborhood, and a year ago, my husband and I bought my parents' house and remodeled it, and so we moved in May. And I am appalled at the way the neighborhood is now. We live one house down from the four-way stop at Charman and Brighton, and cars go blowing through that four-way stop like you wouldn't believe and go flying down the hill. And it's very dangerous, I think. I'm just waiting for an accident to happen. We have skateboarders and groups of kids nonstop going by our house, heading down to the bluff. And they're intimidating. They are to us. I'm working out in my yard. You try to be polite because you don't want to be a target of retaliation. So I try to be nice to them, but they're intimidating. And I'm just hoping that something can be done. And I miss going to the bluff. I don't go down there anymore. I used to like to walk my dog, and I just avoid it. And it used to be one of my favorite spots, so I miss it. Thank you.
Cam McCurdy and Francesca Anton.
You go first.
Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners, my name is Cameron McCready. I'm a citizen of Oregon City. I currently serve as chair of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. I'm here tonight as a private citizen, and I come to express my support for my neighbors in the Rivercrest neighborhood. I witnessed firsthand what they've been enduring for several years now, and it's only gotten worse. Over the past few years, when I've ridden my bike or walked up the Waterboard Park Trail to the viewpoint, I've seen several teenagers gathered together passing a bong. I've heard loud music with extremely offensive and violent lyrics. I've picked up trash, and I've found 3 empty Ready Whip containers, which I assume were used for huffing. What I do not see is the crowd enjoying the view in quiet awe. The McLaughlin Neighborhood Association Steering Committee will be discussing this ongoing problem that our neighbors have been faced with. I wish to assure them that the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association general membership will be given an opportunity to vote on supporting the Rivercrest Neighborhood Association's efforts. It is my hope that with a combined effort, we can create a positive outcome that is fair to all concerned. That's it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Anton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, and city staff. I've been at my house at 123 High Street for 21 years now, but in this time, in 1978, I came to Oregon City to help a longtime school friend who had health issues, and I ended up getting offered a job and staying. So I've really been in this town, in and around this town since then. And when I got my job, I used to run up and down the Waterboard Park up to the bluff twice before I went to work every morning. And for many years, especially since I've been semi-retired, I probably at least 5 days a week, I walk up the Waterboard Trail. I have a big circle that I walk, and I like to spend time at the bluff. And I have spent a lot of time talking to the people who I have been visiting that area and learning about them, and I don't want to victimize them because most of them come from really awful home situations. However, as I said at the Rivercrest meeting when I visited, the space is just no longer appropriate for the issues we have today. So I really do want to support the Rivercrest neighborhood getting organized about this because that's what it takes. And the only thing I'd like to add is because I live at an entrance to the Promenade Park, and I spend a lot of time on the promenade, and a lot of tourists and visitors to this city walk by my house. And I can't tell you how many times they have said to me that they tried to visit the Overlook, I call it the Overlook, and they were scared out of their wits. So this is another added safety issue for the people who are visiting our city. It's just, for me, I've spent my career with children and families, and our approach to that spot has been like a permissive parent. And the outcome that we see happening up there is very consistent with what happens with children in a permissive parenting environment. So I think that we need to really address this, and I just feel terrible that these neighbors have had to put up with this so long, and I think we should all imagine what it would be like for all of us if we had to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christopher Staggs and Dan Bean.
Okay, I'll start. My name's Chris Staggs. I live at 19571 Leland Road in Oregon City. I'm proud to say that I'm now a citizen of Oregon City. I'm a business owner. I own property, and I've been actively involved in a project in Kenema. And I know the city fairly well, not nearly as well, I'm sure, as Francesca Anton, but I think I'm getting to know the city pretty well. We have our office here locally too, and I'm excited about Oregon City and about the future of Oregon City. And I got up here today just to thank the city and the planning department for all their work on the development code amendments that are being considered right now and that are going to be reviewed and discussed tonight. And from an architecture, planning, and property development background, I'd like to suggest tonight that these code amendments that are being considered are an incredible improvement and really, I think, help pave the way for the future of Oregon City to be continue to be a livable, wonderful city, but also improve on that. And the code amendments that are being made, that are being considered, and hopefully will be adopted, I think are going to improve greatly on the city's livability, walkability, the density of the city, and really make it, sort of take it to the next step up in terms of the improvement of the city. So I just wanted to say that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
My name is Dan Bean. I live on Promontory Avenue, which is about one bomb's throw away from the point. It is, we've lived there 15 years, and it has become horribly unlivable. I would look at your goal number 3, enhance the livability of the community. And it is drastic what has happened there. I sent pictures in to show the activity that has happened there. We hear of course, the loud music at all times of the night. We smell the marijuana coming up over the bluff. I'm a big guy. You saw me when I stood up. I have been threatened as I have gone there. I go down there almost every night, ask them to turn the radios down. The man at the end of the street that Patty Epperson talked about is trying to sell his home, and he's having great difficulty selling it because when people come to look at his home, they see what's at the bluff. So it is destroying the livability and also can significantly affect land values if we don't do something about this. We are here to raise this to a higher level of expectation. We are grateful for the police. We know that they cannot be there 24 hours a day. We understand that. But they come and will clean things out as soon as the police are gone. They come right back. So we are here today just to try to raise the importance of this to an elevation. The things that we've been trying with police efforts just is not working, understandably. So we are hopeful that we can come to a resolution where we might be able to clean that place up and make it more livable for people to enjoy the view and get it back to like it was. I have to tell you, we talk about the pictures and the vandalism that goes on there. Yesterday morning, as I was leaving, I saw another tagging. They've tagged the brick wall again on that beautiful brick wall. They've torn down another sign that the Public Works just put up 4 or 5 months ago. So that's been vandalized. It just continues and isn't ending. And so we hope that this is raised to an elevation and an importance level to the City Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bob Mahoney and Reno Josen.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I'm here to speak.
Name and city for the record, please.
Reno Josen, property owner in Oregon City. I live in Southeast Portland, and it took us 5 years to deal with our problem there. I'm here to talk about the Harris Lane condominiums. In 2003, my business partner Don and I worked with Clackamas County, the city of Oregon City, mainly Guy Spurge and Samantha when they were still here, and we worked with the real estate board to set up this plat on Harris Lane to build 16 units in 4 buildings. In 2008, the real estate business tanked, but we had substantially completed 3 buildings and the foundation on the 4th. Everything was permitted and approved. We have the site plans. We have all of the appropriate infrastructure plans approved, all of the paving and landscaping done and approved. We went in now because economically we can, and we see there's a demand from everybody we talk to in all 3 counties I work in for affordable housing. We are unable to secure a permit for the last building, and they say the only way we can build the 4th building is it has to be 5 feet higher to satisfy some new code that we were not aware of. We've done our due diligence. We've worked with the real estate board in the state to set up the condominium association, and there's no functional way to put a commercial property in there, which the city is demanding, because there's no egress, there is absolutely no parking, and the community does not want it. The foundation's there. All we need to do is build the building. The rain storm management system was the first one of its kind in Oregon City, and we worked with Public Works to get that in place, and it's working incredibly well. The erosion control, nothing has to be done because the asphalt is all complete. And we're here because we're not getting satisfaction elsewhere. We were told that the legal counsel said we have no choice, but we haven't seen a response from that letter or whatsoever. So we're asking your help in sorting this out and getting this building complete. The engineering is done. The plans have been redone. They had told us we could grandfather this in because everything had been done, and then changed their mind. But before that, they asked us to upgrade the cover sheet to show the exact siding we're using. We've done everything. We've done everything we can. Do you guys want some affordable housing? There's 4 units that can go up and be ready for sale. There's 35 people on the waiting list that have been pre-approved that are going to be taxed.
Actually, what I was going to do is ask you a question. You have been working with planning.
Yes.
Okay. And the way we normally do things here is you have to work with the planning department. The community development director will make a decision. If maybe Tony, you can explain how the process works from the.
Well, how about I turn it over to
Okay, that's
Laura? I'm
fine.
not sure where they're at, if there's actually a land use application that's been submitted, or there's a history to this one that goes back
Right.
quite a ways.
There's not, we have been meeting with representatives from your group. We can meet again and chat about it as well.
May I speak? The biggest problem we have is a 5-foot height discrepancy.
Okay, sir, I'm gonna stop you right there.
Okay.
The deal is that we don't do this work here at the city commission, okay? That's what we have staff for. If staff makes a decision, then there will be a process whereby if community development makes a decision,
They can appeal.
is there an appeal from the community development director to the city commission?
This issue relates to a question of expiration of a site plan design review application. The applicant can always apply for a code interpretation of the planning commission or reapply for a new site plan design review application.
Okay,
And
so
communicate
you're
that.
just gonna have to follow the process, and if it turns out that that requirement is the requirement, there's really nothing we can do. We don't change our code on an individual basis.
You actually did in this case, though. But I just have one question. I really appreciate your time. All I ask is, if I send a letter to you, sir, Tony, I just appreciate a response one way or the other, because I did send a letter to you and I have not received a response. It's been 7 weeks.
To me?
To you directly, sir.
Okay, I will go back and look.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Mahoney.
Good evening. My name is Bob Mahoney. I live in Oregon City. I hadn't intended to speak tonight on this issue, but got my fur up a little bit. I think that one of the things you can do for the and I don't mean to
What
approach this
issue are we
lightly.
talking about?
I'm going to tell you in a minute, Mr. Mayor. I'm a little miffed. Right now, somewhere in the world, there's an Air Force, Marine, Naval, or Army person walking guard to guard this country. There's nobody up there in that bluff right now. I'd be glad to designate that as a Marine Corps picnic area if you like.
I second the motion.
Those people out there have taken their gloves off. Let's take our gloves off. We've got laws on the books right now. Loitering, intimidation, breaking and entry, assault. What more do you need? Let's get on with it. Take your gloves off, folks. You honored this flag tonight in the opening ceremony. Let's follow through. These people behind me need some help. Let's go help them. Let's get on Sentry. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Next up is Brian Shaw and Pam Wilson. Commissioner Shaw, welcome.
Brian Shaw, Oregon City, and Oregon City Together board member, OCT. You're going to go into retreat here in a little while, and I want you to think about something as you're there, and that's about the use of the revenue that you're generating from the dispensaries. We've talked about this in the past, about how to use that money. Oregon City Together would like to have a portion of that, probably 10%. You're looking at probably getting about $200,000 in revenue from that. We now have 8 dispensaries, and these monies will be used most effectively in partnership with the police department and our schools. As you're going to see, marijuana use is up, and the perception of harm is down. You have to look at that in the 6th grade. So I would like to introduce Pam Wilson, who's our coordinator for Oregon City Together, and she'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you. And for those of you not familiar with Oregon City Together, we're a local coalition, and our sole purpose is to prevent substance abuse in Oregon City. And we have parents on the coalition, youth, Portland City Police Department, Portland City, the Portland School District, different schools, local businesses, and so forth. So we really do represent the entire community. And as Brian said, while the city is receiving the benefits of legal recreational marijuana via local taxes, legal recreational marijuana has had a negative impact on our youth. And to give you an idea of what's happening, well, let's take a look at, there's some stats from the 2018 Oregon Student Wellness Survey. And as you can see on the screen, marijuana use in Oregon City is increasing. And in fact, 11th graders' marijuana use has doubled since 2014, and that's when voters approved legalization. And then another alarming figure that Brian alluded to is the fact that between 2016 and 2018, percentage of sixth graders who think marijuana will harm them took a big nosedive. Today, only 62% of the sixth graders in Oregon City think that marijuana is harmful. And just 2 short years ago, 80% of them thought it was harmful. And of course, unless we can intervene now, these are the very sixth graders who, because they don't think it's harmful, will use marijuana when they get older. You know, and whether we have kids or not, these stats should really alarm all of us. Youth marijuana use is not adult marijuana use. Teen brains are still developing, so they're particularly vulnerable to the impact of marijuana and alcohol. More and more research is showing that early marijuana use can hinder brain development, particularly cognitive brain development, which can lead to less success in school, career, and life. So really just using a small portion, 10% of Oregon City marijuana taxes to keep Oregon City kids off of marijuana will really help protect Oregon City's future, which I believe is its children. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I've got some handouts here too, if I could, please. Okay.
Next up is Paige Hurt and Mayor Neely.
Or no, that's what you sent me.
Hi, my name is Paige Hurt, and I'm a citizen of Oregon City. I'm also a business owner here in Oregon City. But probably most importantly, I have 3 boys, all of which, well, one has went all the way through the Oregon City School District system, and 2 of them still are here. And so I'm really concerned. I do a lot of work with Oregon City Together with Pam and Brian, and the other sector representatives that Pam talked about. And so as a parent, that concern with the perception of harm really decreasing, use increasing, and how that impacts our youth in our community and thereby the future and the success of our youth in our community. So I am also requesting that the city consider contributing some of the revenue to Oregon City Together, to the police department, to mental health services, to prevention services, in hopes of being able to tackle some of the issues that are really concerning. To provide some mental health education, what we've done so far for Oregon City Together is provide a lot of parent education. We provide a lot of community events that help increase awareness. Again, you know, that teen brain versus the adult brain. And kind of taking a look at just how we're organized as a city. The youth I talk to. I'm a mental health therapist, a youth addictions counselor, and so I talk with a lot of youth. I do a lot of work with the juvenile department and just their anecdotal discussions around what they see in Oregon City in regard to our dispensaries and the advertising. And I think that there's been some unintended consequences in our city to the youth by having just the public advertising and just how it appears in the city, and a lot of confusion around whether or not, again, marijuana is harmful because it's legal. So really asking for that support so we can do our job with youth and help protect them.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor Neely.
Doug Neely, Oregon City. Mine's going to be a personal story. Some of you have heard this, but at least 2 members have not. My daughter was a heroin addict, and what turned her around was a difficult process, but it involved her partner murdering somebody. We were able, thanks to a police resource officer, to get her into the court system, get her out of the court system and into a 6-month treatment program. Got a grandson who also is a heroin addict. What it took him to get out of it was his partner overdosing and dying in front of him. You don't want to put your kids or grandkids or anybody through that kind of circumstances. In both cases, it was marijuana that was the gateway drug. Marijuana is not what it used to be. The THC levels are far, far higher than they were when any of you were, say, young. Extracts have 50 to 80% THC levels in them. And nobody knows the long-term effect of marijuana with these higher THC levels. We don't have that kind of history. And as Paige pointed out and the previous people pointed out, it affects the brain development, not only through adolescence, but into early childhood, early adult development. And I think, she said some funds. I think the nexus between the revenue you're getting and trying to prevent youth from using the marijuana should be a very strong nexus. It shouldn't be some of the money, it should be most of the funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Gifford.
Am I back and clean up here? I wanted to make sure that Rivercrest is.
And now you're the last one.
Thanks.
Chris Beggs.
I had a couple of comments. My name is William Gifford. I live in Oregon City, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. And I wanted to make a mention of last night's Park Foundation visioning process. We thought it was a pretty successful event. I wanted to give a personal thank to Commissioners Ide and Commissioners Lyle Smith for attending that. We had a couple of dozen people there. It was a robust conversation, and we're looking forward to some positive things out of that. I also want to thank Maureen Cole, our library director, for allowing us to use the library for that conversation. And I had signed up for a later item on the consent agenda, but I may not need to mention that there's a PGE property transfer of some property along the promenade there that it wasn't real clear to me how that's working, but I understand it has something to do with the charter consolidation of park property and so on and so on. That's one of the areas that the Parks Foundation has been working very hard at replanting with indigenous hardy plants down in that area, and we've been working very hard at that. When I saw the map, I was surprised to see that that was an area that was being transferred to the city, because I thought it was city property. So it's nice to see that being cleared up. Just want to let you know that we're working hard to get some action on our parks.
No mention of the OCBA?
I understood that the citizen comments were not supposed to be regarding agenda items.
No, I said the OCBA meeting on, is it next week?
It's actually the week after that.
Oh.
Yes, it's the 22nd. It's 2 weeks from tonight. Is that right?
It's next week.
6 days.
6 days, yes. It's a short 2 weeks. It's a short fortnight.
Consolidated.
Short fortnight, yes. The Oregon City Business Alliance is having their presentation from the city manager regarding economic opportunities in 2018 and 2019. And that's at 11:30 at the Abernathy Center, and everyone is welcome and invited.
Thank you. Okay, so this was is there anybody else who wishes to speak before we move into the agenda? So with the commission's permission, I'm going to offer a continuation of the Rivercrest neighborhoods issue and say that, Mr. Conkle, why don't you put together, say yourself, Public Works Director, Parks Director, somebody from the police. I would suggest no more than 3 or 4 members from both McLaughlin and Rivercrest get together, come up with some solutions that you can bring back to us.
Sounds good.
And in the meantime, we can't just close that right now. Let's get the groups together, let them sit down and talk and figure out how we can do that. Is there somebody from the commission that wishes to attend that?
Depends when meetings are.
I would do it.
Okay.
I'll tell you why I would do it.
Too.
We heard you tonight. And you don't know it, but in my youth, I have a law enforcement background. And what I heard tonight and what I read is there are some enforceable offenses we can take action on, as Bob Mahoney said. And, okay, what do we need to do that? Because those things can turn into an immediate riot. That's not a one-man attack, okay? I think about traffic control devices. I question, and this is why this task force is a good idea. You know, those of you who live there, what inconveniences are you willing to live with in exchange to get rid of this problem? You know, if we make traffic flow changes, that affects you, but is it a good trade-off for maybe we can minimize the impact of what you're living with now? You know, you talked about hours of access limitations. I don't know about that, and that's a legal opinion that we'll get. The noise complaint, I mean, there's actionable items. Some of them can be mechanical in nature, some of them can be law enforcement in nature. But I'm with Mahoney on this, so let's take it back, you know? I mean, the one gentleman cited livability of the community. I live next to a park, I know what you're saying, but I don't have that severe situation. And you know what, your home is your castle, it's where you go to regroup. So I'll volunteer to work on that committee.
Before we move on, does anybody else have any other comments?
I just have one. I think that I understand that it takes time to get people together to organize something like that, but I think this is an expedient situation and we need to get on it right away. These people are suffering and I'm really happy you came in. I'm just surprised that I hadn't heard about this with maybe within the last couple of weeks. It just hadn't crossed my radar and I don't know, I don't like that and I don't know why. So.
Okay.
Thank you. Sooner
With
than
that-
later.
Say thank you very much.
Sure. Yep. Then if you guys don't want to stick around for the scintillating code updates.
Oh, we can leave too. He comes with you.
I'm confused.
What you asked for.
That's right.
Apparently he's from the military.
I miss the old days.
You're going over.
On the other hand,
I got Ryan with her a couple minutes.
You gotta respect people. Sure. All right, so we are moving on to the agenda now. We have public hearing. This is PC 19-007.
Oh, Mayor, sorry.
Yes.
I do want to pull the agenda item that Mr. Gifford was asking about. I have a couple questions.
Okay, we'll get to that when we get to the consent agenda.
Well, we're on the adoption of the agenda right now, which is where you pull items off the agenda. So I'm just.
Well, actually, typically what I do, Commissioner Smith, is I ask at the beginning of the consent agenda item if anybody wants to pull anything from the consent agenda. So, moving on, PC 19-007, Development Code Amendments, including equitable housing, planning file LEG 18-00001. Ms. Turway.
Thank you very much. All right. The City Commission way back had heard concerns from the public that it was hard to find a place to live, whether to buy or to rent. And from that, we listed a goal on our City Commission goals for the biennium to address equitable housing and look at some code changes. We secured about $100,000 money from Metro in order to do that. And we have gone through this code amendment process. This is not our first time here. What we have before you tonight is the complete package of all the code amendments. Most of them relate to housing, whether you are building a house, whether you're subdividing land to build a house, whether you're building multifamily or something like that. There are a couple that are non-related to housing, and we can talk about that too. So how this program is set up is we have identified a list by topic and assigned each topic a date. And so for today's date, which is the first of this series of 4 meetings, we're generally talking about residential housing options in single family, low density residential, medium density residential, comp plan zoning designations. And so what we will be doing as we move through these series of 4 meetings is we'll be using our 15 minutes to give a brief presentation highlighting the major topics. We'll identify the major items that were of concern, both with the public or the planning commission as well. And then we'll be available to answer any questions. From my understanding, we will take that package, assume everything is all good unless you answer questions and then change associated code amendments. So now is the time for anyone who has any public comment regarding anything in this first package for low density and medium density residential to voice your opinion before we move on to the next item. After that series of hearings, we'll come out with the revised code amendments if the commission has made any changes. And we're here to answer any questions. We acknowledge that this is one tool in a toolbox of many tools to address additional housing options. We are not building anything. We are just looking at code-related options. And in general, this package does a wonderful job about removing barriers to housing and even provides some incentives in some cases as well. So with that, at the end of this, we'll be asking for continuance to February 6th, which is the next meeting. Pete Walter will be providing a presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. With me is Elizabeth Decker with Jet Planning, and she's been the lead on the code amendments for the housing portion of this. And so Elizabeth will be starting this off, and then I will be speaking towards the end of the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Commission. Mayor, thank you for having me here tonight. Elizabeth Decker with Jet Planning. And as Ms. Turway and Mr. Walter mentioned, this evening we're focusing on the low and medium density areas. And just a little note about terminology, there are, and excuse me if you know this already, there are low and medium density comprehensive plan designations as well as low and medium density zones. We will spare you the acronyms of these specific zones, the RLD 6810s, whatever's, and just for purposes of this presentation, refer to the low and the medium groupings. And our main, our main focus with these code amendments relating to housing in the low and medium areas was to expand what's commonly known these days as missing middle housing options, which means basically something in between single family detached and apartments on the other end. So how can we have some other alternatives? So with our work on this project, we took a broad look at all of the comprehensive plan and zoning designations and looked at some opportunities for housing. And this is the full summary table of the different types of housing and different areas of the city in which they're proposed to be allowed. And for this evening's purpose, we will be, focusing on the low density and the medium density designations. And so the lavender here looks kind of grayish, highlights the low density areas and the primary housing types that will be permitted there. And then the lighter blue-ish highlights the medium density area and the additional housing types that are proposed in those areas. And so overall, the orange here, orangish, shows the new opportunities for additional housing types that are being proposed with this package of code amendments. And the idea, as you can see, is to significantly increase housing opportunities, thereby removing barriers to residential development and providing greater variety of housing options for Oregon City residents through future development. So a few big picture changes to highlight before we walk through each of these individual housing types is to see that there's several new residential use types proposed, the ones that are all orange across. So internal conversions, corner duplexes, 3 to 4 plexes, and manufactured home parks are all new residential types in the city that we're bringing forward with this package of code amendments. And there are several other townhouses and duplexes we're proposing to expand into more of the medium density zones. So significantly expanding where those will be allowed in the city. All right, so first item to note is over 70% of the Oregon City housing stock is single family detached right now. It's what we traditionally think of as housing options. And nothing in this, the idea behind this package of code amendments is to support further development of those while adding additional opportunities. And so the main regulations that affect single-family detached homes, including dimensional standards, density standards, and design standards, are not proposed for change with this package of amendments. We are proposing some consolidation, some minor cleanup. There's some odd side yard setbacks that we're proposing to simplify, but by and large, the design standards, the dimensional standards, and density for single-family detached will stay the same. We've just simplified them in an easier to read format. And I'm going to turn it over to Pete now to talk a little about single-family detached in the concept plan areas.
Okay, so the concept plan areas that I'm talking about here are the Park Place concept plan area, which is the one shown in the red hatching on the left, and the South End concept plan area on the southwest side of the city. In both of those concept plan areas, we adopted code with design standards that were specific to each of them. And the intent behind not just the design standards, but also some of the street standards that are currently in the code for medium and high density residential areas was to reduce the impact of garages on the streets in those higher density areas, have pedestrian friendly walkable sidewalks and things like that, and to provide more space for on-street parking and street trees. And some of that is in 1612-026, but the actual housing standards are in 1721 and 1722. So the question that we're dealing with is if 1721 and 1722 are too complicated and onerous to promote development of the concept plan areas, which we've heard some testimony about and which is in your packets, will replacing those with the more streamlined 1714 still comply with the intent of the concept plans. And when those concept plans were adopted, we had to show compliance with Metro Title 11, which is the urban growth functional plan for new residential areas. And what that does is you have to have zoning that implements a diversity of housing, but they don't get into design standards. That's a city thing. So the character of the neighborhoods and how you regulate design is not part of Title 11. And so with that, we're going to come back to that question. And Elizabeth's going to continue on with the housing types.
Yeah, and just quickly, I would note that when we did an audit at the beginning of this project, we did highlight the fact that there are different design standards in those concept plan areas, but PAT and staff and consultants really prioritized, as you'll see, the bulk of the other code concepts as their priority through this process. And so we really weren't able to spend significant time updating those standards because we were focused on these citywide standards. But we did highlight that it could be a barrier to development. So diving into the work that we did spend a lot of time prioritizing, we spent a lot of time working on accessory dwelling units. These are proposed they're already allowed in the low and medium density zones. They're allowed with any single family detached home and no change there. However, we are proposing a considerable overhaul of these regulations, and this both helps to implement some statewide requirements under Senate Bill 1051 that was effective as of July 1 this year, and to genuinely expand opportunities to build accessory dwelling units, which really allow the benefit of those being that it allows for additional housing to be integrated in a relatively low impact way in existing neighborhoods and make the best use of existing housing stock in existing neighborhoods. So a few provisions that have generated significant discussion are the owner occupancy standard, and that is a regulation is currently on the books, requires that if you build an accessory dwelling unit, the property owner must live either in the main property or in the accessory dwelling unit. The project advisory team, the staff and consultant recommend removing that provision. That's consistent with industry best practices and the state recommendations to implement Senate Bill 1051. There are no other occupancy requirements for any other housing types. You can certainly have some other policing issues rather than knocking on doors and figuring out, is the person living there a property owner or not. So Planning Commission did recommend retaining the owner occupancy standard, however, out of some concerns about changing neighborhood dynamics and possible vacation rental concerns. The other issue that was discussed at length regarding accessory dwelling units is off-street parking. The current standard is to require one off-street parking space with an accessory dwelling unit unless there is on-street parking available nearby. And Project Advisory Team recommended removing the requirements altogether for off-street parking, which is consistent with industry best practices and state recommendations for Senate Bill 1051. However, Planning Commission recommended tightening the parking requirement, and so the draft ahead of you in front of you would require one off-street parking space with no exceptions. However, there was significant discussion about different ways to formulate this requirement and what the intended impact was, and so there was really not a unanimous Planning Commission decision on this issue. The next housing type that was discussed are internal conversions, and this is a new use that's proposed in the low and medium density zones. The idea is that it would apply to homes that are 20 years or older. That's approximately 75% of the existing housing stock in Oregon City. And the idea is to provide additional flexibility to divide up an existing home into more than one dwelling unit, thereby preventing demolitions and making better use of existing housing stock within existing neighborhoods. Up to 4 units could be permitted. Hypothetically, there are some issues with the building code. If you go over 2 units, you trigger a much more stringent multifamily building code, and so it's most likely that you would see 2 total units. And there also is a cap of 1 unit per 2,500 square feet of site area. So if you had a 5,000 square foot lot, or even a 6,000 or 7,000 square foot lot, you could only have those 2 units anyways. It would only be a larger 10,000 square foot lot or larger that could make use of the 4. And the main issue that was discussed regarding internal conversions had to do again with off-street parking. The project advisory team recommended that no off-street parking requirement with this, in part because, by definition, you are retrofitting an existing house. It may or may not have parking, but if you're retrofitting it, you probably don't have the opportunity to add a lot of additional parking. And Planning Commission recommended, however, to add a requirement for 1 off-street parking space for an internal conversion with 1 to 2 units and 2 parking spaces if you converted to 3 or 4 units. For corner duplexes, that's another new use that is proposed with this package of amendments. It's proposed to be allowed in all low density and medium density zones for corner lots, hence the name. And part of the design standards for this, the facades would be subject to the same street facing standards as single family detached homes, including to have the doors face 2 different streets. So you'd essentially have 2 single family facades. The idea is to increase compatibility that way while adding in some additional opportunities within primarily single-family detached zones. Along those lines, there's also discussion about duplexes, and these are currently allowed in the R3.5 zone. That is the medium density zone with, and they are proposed with this package of amendment to be expanded and allowed in the R5 medium density zone. And the proposed code does include a requirement for slightly larger lot sizes to accommodate these duplexes in both of those zones. And then also that they have to meet the same residential design standards on the street-facing facades as single-family detached. So again, to increase design compatibility. We spent a lot of time working on the single-family attached, AKA townhouse or row house design standards. This is a very popular option for development. It allows for a more affordable model of home ownership or rentals. It is currently similar to duplexes, allowed as a permitted use in the R3.5 zone and is proposed to be expanded to the R5 medium density zone. And also is proposed to be allowed in the low density zones, but only through a master plan. And these townhouses, part of the dimensional standard proposal before you, would allow smaller lot sizes that reflect the dimensional needs of townhouses, namely that they don't need a side yard, so you need less lot area and less side yard setbacks. The code amendments also include new design standards. They draw from a similar menu of design features as single-family detached homes. So similar vocabulary, if you will, but just a different way of configuring it and additional consideration about shared driveways and rear access, some of those same issues that have been at play in the concept plan area. We also addressed, in our work with the project advisory team, manufactured home parks. There are over 400 units in 3 different manufactured home parks in Oregon City already. And while the economics make it really difficult to start new parks, the current parks are in limbo right now because they are not a permitted use. That means that they have to travel a very difficult non-conforming use path if they want to make any modifications to the existing parks. And so the proposal is to permit these existing parks in the R3.5 zone. That's where they're already located. And it really just solidifies their existing status, and it allows additional modifications to the parks consistent with the standards. The other thing to understand about manufactured home parks excuse me, is that there's substantial state regulation of manufactured home parks, and so the standards that are proposed in the packet in chapter 1720.050 are intended to derive from and align with the state standards, and there are places where the city standards are silent because there's no need to duplicate the state standards. So if you have any questions about things that may or may not seem like they're missing, I can give you some feedback or point you towards the state standards, but that is the short answer to that. And there was also some discussion at the project advisory team and planning commission about the option to create an exclusive manufactured home park zone, which some communities have done, and that can provide even greater protection for existing home parks by limiting other development opportunities. You essentially take away the incentive to redevelop apartments or townhouses. However, that was outside the scope of this equitable housing code amendment package because it would require some much more substantial changes to the comprehensive plan. So the recommendation is to make them a permitted use in the existing R3.5 zone for now, and certainly could be revisited with future comp plans. A new use.
How much more time do you have?
Looks like we have about 5 more slides.
Okay.
New concept here is to add 3 to 4 unit developments in the medium density zones, R5 and R3.5. And we pulled these out as a subset of apartments, thinking that a 3 or 4plex like this really doesn't need to be regulated the same way as a 100 unit apartment complex, and just has some different design and site design needs. So the core issue here, project advisory team staff and consultants recommended no minimum parking requirements for this new use, just to allow greater flexibility of how the use is carved up. Again, for all these issues, even if there's no minimum parking requirement, developers are still flexible to provide as much off-street parking as they feel is necessary to be functional and to make their units desirable. So there was a recommendation to have no minimum parking. However, Planning Commission recommended a minimum of 2 units for these types of uses. Or, I'm sorry, two off-street parking spaces. And then the last housing type that I want to talk to you about is cluster housing, which is sort of the new reinvented cottage housing. Cottage housing's been on the books for a while in Oregon City, and currently allows more smaller units around a common green space and only focuses on small single-family detached units currently. It is already a permitted use in the low and medium density zones, and we're not proposing to change that, but the package of code amendments does include a significant shift of the regulations to expand what kinds of units can be built as a cottage cluster, so really reimagining it as the idea was to mirror the same types of housing types that are allowed in the base zones, to be allowed in the clusters. So if you're in a low-density zone and you can do duplexes and single-family detached, you can do the same in a cluster in those zones. And if you're in the medium density, where you can do townhouses and some, townhouses and 3 to 4 plexes, then you would also be allowed to do those in a cluster at a smaller scale and while retaining the cluster feature similar to this. So you might see townhouses, for example, but they still have a common green space and they still have that same orientation. So really, and we changed some other dimensional and design standards to bring the cluster housing standards more in line with other parts of the code while retaining that central trade-off of smaller units at a higher density for some flexibility, both in infill as well as new development situations. So the top discussion items coming out of Planning Commission review and heading into City Commission review is for accessory dwelling units, should the owner occupancy requirement be removed? And as I mentioned, the project advisory team, consultants and staff recommended removing it from the ADU regulations. And Planning Commission did not reach a full consensus on this issue. Another core issue spanning several different housing types has to do with the minimum off-street parking requirements for both accessory dwelling units, internal conversions, and the new 3 to 4 plex uses. And so again, the project advisory team, consultants and staff recommended eliminating or simply not adding in the case of these new uses, while Planning Commission did recommend some off-street parking minimums for these types of uses. And then the last, we missed one. This one out. Did you want me to talk?
I'm sorry. The last question we were going to ask you was the one I brought up, which was, should the residential design standards of this proposal replace the residential design standards for the concept plan areas, 17, 21, 22?
You're talking about eliminating 17-21 and 22.
That's correct.
Okay. That ends the staff report.
That's it.
Okay, then we are, we'll open the public hearing. And if I can get back to the right screen, I assume we have a couple of speakers. Mr. Gifford, is he the only one?
Well, Chris Staggs had spoke under citizen comment, but I think he had wanted to be, it's Chris, right, or Christopher? He had wanted to be under 6A, so I don't know if he has something further to say or add.
Okay.
We have one more.
Then, Mr. Gifford.
Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners, my name is William Gifford and I live in Oregon City still. I was a little bit confused about the design standards for detached garages. And I would ask all of you, because I know you're all lovers of Oregon City and its historicity is an important factor to that. And it seems to me as though when this city began to grow, when it was in its infancy, there of course were no design standards and it kind of happened. But if you consider the original styles of houses that were built back in the 1800s, and I don't know the technical terms, so I'll make something up because, you know, I like words, and so I'll call it Victor Lofton style. The point is that not all houses were built in the same style.
Sure.
That added a lot of charm, a lot of diversity. That patchwork is part of what's endearing to the old neighborhoods, is that they all didn't look exactly the same. And I would like to hope that our codes are going to allow the diversity that's really required by a growing market. And they all shouldn't have, we don't want to build historic homes. We don't want to build historic homes because they were already built. They had their time in history. There is a time for new designs. That's what I want to say.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Debbie DeRusha.
Good evening, everybody. Debbie DeRusha, Leland Road, Oregon City. I guess I've testified here before and I've presented paperwork or memos and so forth, specifically with regard to the owner occupancy of the ADUs and the limit of the 20 years on the internal conversions. And I did not come with that, and I didn't send that to you for this meeting. I'm hoping that all of you, especially the new members, have had a chance to see that or read that, or should I give that to you again? So I would like to support removing the owner occupancy on ADUs. And then I had proposed in my last testimony to reducing the internal conversion, the age of the home from 20 years, which it currently is at, to something less than that. And I had lots of supporting stuff, but I don't have it here with me. So I'm not sure how I should proceed with that if you don't have that information.
If you submitted materials into the record, they are in the record already. So if you've already submitted them to the planning commission, they're in the record and they are available for review.
And we attached all comments that were submitted to the agenda as well. So they have it in this packet.
So I just want to reiterate my support of those items and get it on the record that I spoke again about that today.
Thank you. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you.
Amy Wilhite.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Amy Wilhite, citizen of Oregon City. I sat in on the project advisory team. I did not sign off on it. Not going to get into that tonight, but I would like to advocate for the stricter parking requirements. We've seen all kinds of different parking requirements come and go over the years. We have residential and commercial areas that you can't get in and out of. The police can't safely go through because you have cars parked on both sides because there's not sufficient parking in the units. I just watched my sister move into some townhouses in Canby, and there's not sufficient parking, and it's horrendous. They're brand new, and there's nowhere to park.
Those are the ones over off 4th?
10th, 11th.
Oh, okay, all right.
So I would just really like to strongly encourage that you consider this. When the project advisory team, I think Elizabeth clarified it just briefly there at the end, it's not that we asked for them to be eliminated. That wasn't even discussed because they were new issues, but parking did come up a lot. And in the neighborhoods all over town, currently, wherever we have townhomes or we have duplexes, we have severe parking. Go over by the high school, go over off of Glen Oak, and you will see severe parking issues. Come in my Gaffney Lane neighborhood, the townhouses off Garden Meadow and Chardias, you can't get through there at night. It's really bad. So I would really hope you will take that into consideration, that off-street parking, I understand from a developer standpoint, no one wants to pay for that, but it's really necessary, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration. And I don't quite understand the duplex or the townhouse in the lower density, the R6, 8, and 10, as far as the master plan, because I think that shouldn't be allowed anyway, but that's just my personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, then I'm going to close the public hearing and we will deliberate. I'm going to provide a little.
Deliberate?
Discuss, deliberate.
I prefer if you just discuss, because I don't think that if you're going to continue this, unless you're going to make a decision on the whole enchilada tonight, I think discussion would be more appropriate.
Okay, so I'm gonna guide this a little bit. Can we go back to the presentation? And I'm gonna start at the end. So the last thing that Pete talked about was 1721 and 17-22. I'm gonna change my normal habit here, and I'm gonna go first. And I think that that it does not make sense for us to require those 4 basic housing types in these two particular areas. It seems strange to me that we would be, requiring Queen Anne's and vernaculars and nothing else in what is going to be a new development or a new series of developments in Park Place and in South End. What Mr. Gifford said really struck a chord with me, and that is that this city has grown up in shifting styles as we've gone through the decades. And so we have neighborhoods that have a lot of ranches in them. We have neighborhoods that have split levels. And as the taste of the consumer changes, then builders respond to those, preferences and change the way they build. So I would support removing 1721 and 1722, and I would hear discussion from the rest of the commission.
So my only question I agree with you, absolutely. My only question is about a revision to a concept plan and the public involvement that went into developing that plan. And I'm questioning, I think we should do it, but I'm wondering, should this be another public involvement process versus, I feel like we're kind of usurping the community's work that they did to develop the concept plan. So I'm interested in feedback. That's just a concern, but I do agree with, I think the design restriction should probably be removed, but I'm just cognizant of the public process that took place in those neighborhoods who showed up and voiced opinions about them. Granted, maybe 20 years ago, but I don't know, Laura, if you have a comment on.
Yeah, how did those get there in the first place?
Right. I can probably speak to that. So
Okay.
I can on each of the consulting teams for these concept plans, there was an architect and a designer.
Okay.
And there are, by nature, new concept plan areas that are going to be designed to be a complete community and walkable. And so a lot of the focus was on, pedestrian-friendly design and that sort of thing. And so some of the design concepts in both concept plans were talking about not Queen Anne and vernacular per se, but they were talking about eyes on the street. They weren't saying you should put alleys in or you should get rid of garages on the street. They were saying these are things that make a community more walkable, more pedestrian friendly, and work really well in higher density neighborhoods. However, there are other arguments out there, and that's what we're here to discuss.
But you're saying that they were saying that it should.
Right. So
but this turned into shall from should.
Because we wrote code to implement that through not just the design standards, but also in the street standards too. So you'll see in chapter 16.12, I believe, the design standards for new development, there is a requirement for alleys in the medium density, high density mixed use zones. And that was amended in this packet to just apply to the concept plan areas. It formally applied to the entire city, wherever those zones were, but it didn't really work for infill. So,
Well, part of my concern is when I review the matrix of all the changes that were made for all of the chapters, specifically these two, 17, 21, and 22, it says grammatical changes only. And so I'm surprised that we're talking about removing those chapters, which is much different than grammatical changes. And so I feel like we're talking about something totally different. And so I'm a little surprised. I know we received public comment on it. Maybe that's why we're addressing it, but.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the reason why we're talking about it tonight is because there was a handful of public comments proposing to do that, and so we wanted to make sure that you understood the trade-offs. In the code package now, it does not propose to remove them. The thought process there is, though we did send notice to everyone in the city, and it was a very open process, we didn't say that we were getting rid of them. And can you hear me okay? All right, sorry. So this package currently does not include removal of those two chapters. And just to clarify, those chapters are very, very similar to each other, and there's some aspirational statements about vernacular and things like that. but then it's still a menu-based approach, but some of the things on the menu are much different than that would apply to other places in the city. So there's a requirement for either rear, side, or detached garages. So again, that walkability thing. So our package before you currently doesn't have this amendment. We did get a lot of comment in the last couple of days regarding it. And so we wanted to make sure that if you were to combine them all to one chapter and remove these chapters applicable to the concept plan areas, that you understood that it would still comply with metro requirements, but why it was there in the first place was through that public review process.
So let me clarify just a hair. When we do these concept plan areas, there isn't the same level of scrutiny from the people that are actually going to build this stuff. So it's more of the community and planning commission and, some other folks. But when now it's coming down to people are actually starting to think about how they're going to build these things. And one of the big problems with both 1721 and 1722 is that it constrains the builders to these very specific things that we don't do anywhere else in the city. And so my concern would be just have everybody come under 1714.
I would agree with that. And one of the citizen comments that came in from Rick Givens this week, he gave an example of how they complied with this code, but their experience in the market, I'm reading here, in trying to market vernacular homes in Oregon City, they were having difficulty selling those homes, while the other homes that were not the historic type, they didn't have any problem selling. So, I think that that's just an example of being required to build those types of homes. Another one of the requirements in there is front porches on all units. Excuse me. And this was an odd one to me, a second walkway from the street to the entry. I can't imagine why that would be an absolute requirement. But anyway, so I agree that I think was it section 14? Yeah, the one that's current. Yeah, 1714. It's already pretty stringent. And so I think we should just stay with that.
Commissioner Smith? I see you steaming over there.
Oh, yeah. This conversation, let me think through this before I say it. It actually scares me that people up here don't know why that's there. And I can say it blunt, but I think that's pretty blunt. This is for Park Place neighborhood, and the design, so specifically the letters that refer to design standards were based on Park Place and
South End, there's two different concept plan areas and they each have their own chapter with very similar design standards.
But what this goes to is, especially in the Park Place, so Park Place concept is the history of this city. And the expectations the citizens put around those comprehensive plans to account for the historic nature of Park Place, which is where the Oregon Trail comes through. That's the entire reason that some of those expectations were put in there. So I have some of the same concerns that Commissioner Rachel Smith has about, if that went through all this process, then how do we account for that process in responding to this? It's very clear that those of us that have heard about this whole process for months didn't hear about this issue until tonight. And the only letters come from, read where the letters come from. Right? So this is not an issue that came up, it sounds like to me, in any of this process is also an issue that hasn't been recommended by staff. And you don't know why it's there? I mean,
No, I just disagree with the concept.
Then you can, but there is a clear reason why it's there. And the example that Commissioner Ide alluded to with this letter refers to a development that is built around a National Historic house that owned a piece of property where all the new houses were built around it and were designated to be designed that way so it connected with the original connection to that original house, which makes complete sense. And I would like to ask, are any of those houses empty? No, they're completely filled. They're all sold. So who cares if it took a little longer to sell them? They were sold, and it has the complete nature of that house, historic National Historic house, has the same identity as the house is built around it. Clearly exactly like what we did with the Ainsworth house. Okay? So to say that you don't understand it, and I'm not saying that maybe you don't, but it clearly was like, well, why was this was an issue next to the McCarver house? If you don't understand why that was an issue next to the McCarver house and why those houses were specifically designed that way, then the question that this city has answered, the citizens of this town have talked about so many times about the importance of the history of this town, the importance of the nature of how our neighborhoods look, especially the historic neighborhoods, and the debate that we've had clearly in the last year about this. Nobody's brought it up until tonight because we get 2 letters from very clearly backed by developers. It's a little bit transparent to see exactly what's going on here, and I will not support it at all.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, first I'm going to comment on Commissioner Rocky Smith's comments that I welcome his return here because that would have been my first question. I don't know how we got to this point, how it was integrated in this plan, so now I do. Other than that, that's the continuity of information that an elected process and turnover in your commission loses. I want to respect the public input. Now I have an understanding as to why. I am respectful of that. I'm respectful of our history. I'm not sure. I'm also respectful of builders who invest lots of money because I built my own house and I know I needed it to close because I was paying for it whether I got to occupy it or not. And they've got, to them, it's inventory. Some of these stipulations on this were amazing to me as one who has built homes for my own use, not for others. I looked at the efficiency of the land use with detached garages and points of entry and a couple of things I won't re-mention because Commissioner Hides already did. There's recessed windows. I don't even know what that means. I don't know if that means putting a surround around a window or what. I don't even know how you do a recessed window unless you live in, I don't know, one of the hotter parts of the country where they actually do recess the things. Front porches, this limiting the thing, I didn't realize the historic aspect of it until Commissioner Rocky Smith spoke. I'm not sure I think it's open for conversation, but the part that bothers me is something Commissioner Lyle Smith said is usurping public input. We've had it. I understand the builder's viewpoint. Does it preserve the historic nature of the community if around an existing home we build similar homes? And at what expense? Does a builder sit on that particular piece of inventory many months longer? So quite honestly, I've got a lot to think about. The key part is I think there's limitations on the builders and maybe there's an area to which that should extend, not the entire thing, but maybe some transitional area. And I hate for government to get too involved in these things in the private sector. So I honestly have to give it some thought because the key question that you raised is usurping public input. And on the other hand is the right to build what is a marketable versus less than marketable item. So I don't have a conclusion.
Commissioner Smith.
Can I ask Ms. Turway a question?
Sure.
Is there a documented process for revising concept plans that have already been well established? Like
We are not proposing to revise either the Park Place or the South End. We have no intention to.
Could it be done? The answer is yes.
But by the same token, we're saying you're asking this commission to summarily remove those.
I'm not asking, we're just,
I mean,
Staff is not asking that.
staff's not, I mean, that's the discussion we're having. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to phrase it that
But
way.
it would be removing those chapters from those concept plans.
Yes.
so basically, I think the proposal is to remove those sections of code and say that the housing in those concept plan areas are subject to 1714, which is same housing standards as everybody else.
Okay, so I'm going to take one last shot at this. Pete, can you bring back up the map of the two concept plan areas for me, please? Okay. And let's start with Park Place first. How many, in this area, just a wild guess, how many existing homes are there now? I mean,
Less than 200, easily.
okay.
Maybe.
And those homes range from 1900 up to 1970 or 80?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So what we're trying to, and I'm leaning towards the unintended consequences of the public input and all of those kinds of things that took place back in the day when both were talking about both South End and Park Place, in that unlike McLaughlin or Kenema, these things are pretty scattered. And so to try to build, things that technically match something in that area doesn't really make sense, because there's an entire range of housing that's been built in those two areas in that time frame from the early 1900s through today. So,
Which was the case when the concept plan was created as well.
right, but
So
what
that
I'm
still
saying is
didn't
the
affect it.
unintended consequences of limiting, so strictly limiting the design standards for a particular place takes away all of the ability of the builders and the architects to create something new and different going into the future. We can't just cookie cutter, a bunch of Victorians and a bunch of vernaculars. Architecture is a living thing that moves, through time and space. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying we should have a set of standards that belongs to all residential development in the city, and then we let except for, I would agree that if you're going to have standards like this, do we have some specific standards for McLaughlin and Kenema?
They are subject to our historic review board.
Absolutely.
At most homes,
Right.
not all in McLaughlin, depends on if they meet their.
Right, so, we're definitely protecting, those two areas because they're both nationally, well, one's nationally recognized, but we've recognized the McLaughlin neighborhood. But the rest of the city, I think we also need to be able to allow for, architecture to move through space and time.
If I may, Mayor, I would like to propose that we let this topic rest for tonight.
I was gonna move on.
Because I would like an opportunity to get comment from these particular neighborhoods. At least give them a chance to provide public comment to us on this topic, because I feel like it was a little bit sprung on us to be having this conversation, and I'm not sure any of us feel comfortable making a decision
Well,
on it tonight.
we aren't
I
making
know, we're
any
just
decisions
discussing,
tonight anyway. Okay, so let's go back to your last slide again, Pete. So the next one is the off-street parking issue, and I'll let whoever wants to go first.
Some comments about that.
Commissioner Ide.
So let's see, this is concerning the ADUs. And,
I think all three.
pardon me?
Parking.
Oh, yeah.
Parking.
Yeah, true, but I'm specifically thinking about an ADU at the moment. That the proposed code says one off-street parking space is required. And I'm not opposed to that, but I think that it can very well create a logistical nightmare that could potentially be a deal killer for an otherwise great opportunity for a homeowner. I think that, I mean, I just, my house in just to be specific, I live on a street where there's no parking on the street because it's a narrow street and it's a fire lane, and there's no parking on the street at all. Even in front of my own house, I can't park my car. I have space in my driveway and in my garage for vehicles, but I also have under my house, I have a very large crawl space that I could turn into an ADU. And this is saying that if I wanted to do that, I don't particularly want to do that, but if I did, that I could not do that because I live on a street where there's no parking
Or you
allowed
have
on
to
the
take
street.
some of your front yard.
Well, there's, I mean,
I've never seen your house, so I don't know.
I mean, to me, it would just take away, the attractiveness of the entire home to add another parking space there. But I noticed in the red line code that there was a section that was deleted at one point. And I'm just proposing that we add this back in because it kind of mellows out both. And this is what was deleted. The following parking requirements apply to ADUs. One additional parking space is required for the accessory dwelling unit as follows. 1, when none of the roadways in abutting streets are at least 28 feet wide, or 2, when the accessory dwelling unit is created at the same time as the principal dwelling unit, so when it's constructed. And I think that, I'm suggesting that we just add that back in because it can it can reduce this nightmare that could be created for some people that want to create an ADU.
Who's next?
I just wanted to clarify one
Yes.
thing. The parking space is for off-street parking, so it would include a garage space counts as the one, or driveway space also counts as the one, and there's no off-street parking for single-family homes, so as long as you had one off-street parking, if you had a house and an ADU, that would be sufficient, just to clarify.
So in your Nancy Ide example, she would have enough off-street parking already to accommodate the ADU.
Yes, if you had a driveway or a garage, you would be able to meet that
two
standard.
off-street parking spaces.
Well, that just depends on who lives in the home.
No, what they're saying is you already have that, it's already there.
It doesn't have to be, you don't have to
needs to go.
be using it. It has to be there.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay, who's next?
I can go. I think that the one space needs to remain on ADUs. For internal conversion, I think those all need to remain. I'm concerned about 3 to 4 units only having 2 spaces. I know we received public comment, even new public comment recently that 2 spaces is kind of absurd, knowing that there's going to be technically 4 units, so 4 potential small families could go in there. And so I would be open to increasing for the internal conversion, 3 to 4 units, the spaces there. Same thing for the 3 to 4plex.
So let's not forget why we're doing this. And that is we're trying to do what we can, Oregon City's part in solving this, quote, affordable housing crisis, or, allowing more missing middle housing. And if we start doing these, I think there will be very few 3 to 4 unit internal conversions because of the lot square footage abilities that we have. What was my lot in McLaughlin when I was there? It was 90 by 120, I think, and then we added another 30 feet when we got the vacation. So I forget, maybe it was 70 by 120 or whatever it was. And even that would not allow for a fourplex conversion. And to be honest, there is a history of these kinds of internal conversions, especially in the McLaughlin neighborhood. There's a house there are 2 or 3 houses on 9th Street and a couple of the side streets that were converted back in probably, I would guess, the 40s into 4 or 5 units of apartments and have since been reconverted back into either single family or duplex kinds of situations. I lived in McLaughlin for almost 20 years. We had a garage, but it was too small to put anything in except a smart car, and smart cars weren't around back then. It was really designed for a carriage. And we never had any real issues with on-street parking. The biggest issues we had, and it's already in the code, were people parking their RVs or their boats on the street. And you can't do that now anyway. So I would urge us to take some time and think about these minimum parking requirements, because are we going to prevent exactly what we're trying to encourage by this parking?
The only other thing I would add to that, which is the thing that the Planning Commission was really balancing when they came up with these standards, is that they were hoping for 3 and 4plexes and for internal conversions that they would more fit the neighborhood if they didn't have a parking lot in front. And so when there was 4 parking spots in front of a house, to them, that's what they were trying to avoid. So that's just another nugget to consider.
Okay. Anybody else on this before we move on?
And I agree with the mayor. We don't have to take a lot of time to talk about this because the Planning Commission already did, and they told us exactly what to do. I'm not opposed to debating it still about the numbers of spaces, but I tend to lean towards what the Planning Commission said to do, which is to make sure there's some accountability for those parking in the future. So that's all.
Mr. O'Donnell, you got anything?
Yeah, I have a few things. I really always focus on livability of the community. I found Ray Crisp's letter interesting. He commented and entertaining. Talked about parking places and 2 things every resident needs: a place for a dog to poop and a place to park cars. He knows that from being a landlord. If those things are not provided, then an ongoing tension resides in the neighborhood, hence the reference to livability. Talked about most people living here need to commute to work elsewhere. Public transportation not sufficient to adequately support this suburban community. I'm in favor, I would go with Lyle Smith. I think that parking is an integral part of livability. And I don't want to diminish it to the fact that, like in my home, I have 32 feet curb to curb, and we actually had to put in no parking because we couldn't get a fire truck down there. And if you look at what the law allows for, it's 20 feet of parking is what we allocate on a curb per vehicle. And if we put it on a lot, we talk about 9 feet of width and 20. I just think livability is huge, access is huge, avoiding neighborhood disturbances is huge. Quite honestly, we're dabbling in something that's going to find the answer in the laws of supply and demand and forces of economics. We talk about affordable housing. I got news for you. Anybody who puts anything on there is going to rent it for the maximum price they can get. And at some point, the market will get saturated again, and it'll drive those prices down. So we're trying to impact something that only market forces will do. I know we talk about...
I agree there.
Do you? Okay. I know we're trying to do our part, but are we running... I don't want to call it a fool's errand. I know our intentions are good. I don't want to change the characteristics of my community. You know, I think when you move into a single-family neighborhood, that's your expectation. I look at us allowing ADUs on lots as small as 3,500 square feet. You know, we talk about removing owner occupancy. At what point does that just become rentals, you know? And I know that that's a subjective thing where if I live next to the guy I've rented my ADU to, I'm kind of more, hey, I'm going to make sure that guy toes the line. And I always think, what was the intention of this? You know, it started out with things like this mother-in-law cottages, which I totally agree with. So I think I lean towards Commissioner Lyle Smith's thoughts. I know the Planning Commission anguished over this because I watched it. And I think I'd be doing this community a service by removing parking requirements, because you got to take the thing as a whole and not just a component. I know we're trying to do the right thing. I just don't want to do this community disservice and livability. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, so unless somebody has something really pressing on this subject, we're going to move backwards one more slide. And is there one more after this or not?
No, this is the,
Okay, so let's have at this. We just heard what Commissioner O'Donnell had to say. Rocky, you got anything?
I'm open for discussion, but I would lean towards the planning commission's recommendation too.
They didn't have an arrival.
But they brought up,
The code amendments currently include retention of the owner occupancy. You asked for items that were of contention. They didn't completely all agree on that. I mean, it was
that
sort
was
of a
an
mixed
issue
bag.
they wanted.
But, so this was one of the
To keep
items.
it.
They weren't,
So you say they wanted to keep owner occupancy?
the draft code does retain owner occupancy. They did testify to you afterwards about removing owner occupancy.
So I have a question. In the region, is this an outlier? Does anybody else require owner occupancy of one of the two structures?
Elizabeth is our expert for the state.
Yeah, I can speak to that issue. I would say that currently I did an audit of all the ADU regulations in the metro area. That's 27 jurisdictions, and over half of them currently require owner occupancy. As sort of a historical legacy, though, I would say that vast majority of those codes were written around 1990, 2000, when the accessory dwelling unit idea was sort of coming into the fore. And this is really we're in the second birth of accessory dwelling unit regulations right now, and really reimagining it, moving it beyond just the mother-in-law cottage. And so I think the numbers historically don't necessarily reflect the current trends, which are increasingly that cities are removing their owner occupancy requirements. Tiger did that recently, Wilsonville, it's been a long list of cities that are moving towards that. And when the state, as I mentioned, passed Senate Bill 1051, and they asked the Department of Land Conservation and Development, kind of like the state version of your planning department, for advice to local jurisdictions on how to implement accessory dwelling units. One of their core recommendations was to either not add owner occupancy requirements or to remove them if you have them. So that's the status of owner occupancy requirements historically and today.
And I guess the other piece of that to me, and to be honest, I don't really have, I'm not convinced either way at this point. But the one concern I have is creating code that we can't enforce. Right. And so the question is, a guy buys a big house. In fact, the corner at 5th and Jefferson is sort of a prime example of that. There's a big house on the corner, and there's a little smaller version of each house on Jefferson and on 5th. And they were built that way for a reason, because the people who built the house at the corner of 5th and Jefferson were the rich folks, and they had their servants or other maybe kids or whatever lived in the two side houses. I lived in one of the side houses. So the point I'm getting to here is that there's no way that we can figure out. I mean, if the owner decides to move out, he moves out, he rents it out, somebody else moves in, how do we know? So why put something in the code that we really have almost no way to enforce? Commissioner Hyde.
I'm thinking.
Commissioner Lyle Smith.
Yes, I think it should be removed.
Well, why do you think I want it until next time?
Well, look, this is my comment. I was trying to word it right. But, the history of Oregon City in ADUs, I mean, there's very few, it's been in our code to be allowed for many, many years. But, from what I understand, there's only been a couple of applications over the years. And so there's very few ADUs. And I don't know necessarily if it's because the code was really stringent and that, once we open it up a little bit, that all of a sudden, all these people will start wanting to have ADUs. But, in asking around about Portland and other areas, their codes are becoming more freeing them up as well, and they're not seeing the applications. So I guess the point I'm making is I don't think that even if we remove the owner occupancy requirement, I don't think we're going to have suddenly 1,000 applications for ADUs, coming into the planning department. So I think that being that we are trying to provide as much housing in our city for people and to rental housing as well, I would support the owner occupancy requirement being removed.
I'll make a couple comments. One thing you will see, and are seeing in Portland, is a lawsuit by the Multnomah area regarding this very subject, so keep an eye on that. Yeah, they are. I also differentiate in my mind between new development, where you know what you're getting into. We're going to allow you to do this, and the prospective buyers should be made aware of that. I can tell you that I immediately went back to my covenants and restrictions, and I looked at them, and those covenants and restrictions say no. And I'll tell you, the first person that puts one of these in my neighborhood, I'll bring suit against them under the covenants and restrictions. So I think there's a difference between existing neighborhoods and new neighborhoods and understanding what it is. And then again, I agree. I don't think we're going to see these things pop up by the thousands. But I also think that you bought into a neighborhood, you have a certain expectation as to a quality of life, how you want to live, and we're not free to change that. And hopefully, I hope the covenants and restrictions take precedence over government intervention.
I assume that's true, Carrie? That CCRs for a homeowners association would take precedence over the code?
The code will authorize ADUs to be owner occupied or not owner occupied. Private contractual agreements in neighborhoods would be private contractual arrangements. So our code would not trump that. We've talked about prospectively not allowing CC&Rs to restrict middle housing in certain respects, which we can do.
But we haven't yet.
It's in the proposed code amendments.
Okay, but it's not tonight.
Not tonight.
Okay. Anybody else?
Just one more thing, and I agree with how would you enforce it. That's a good point. But just as curious, I mean, I would love to see the list of cities that do and don't. Why? Because it tells us very much. I mean, if we're talking Tigard, Beaverton, that tells us a clear message that this is not the city we want. I mean, so you can tell what cities are doing and changing and the livability of those cities and what that city's expectations are. And I can, a recent point in that I could see happening in this city is we allowed dispensaries. The voters approved that. We allowed it. Certain cities did not. If you look at Lake Oswego, I mean, it's a different feel of what you do when you drive through Lake Oswego. So is Lake Oswego a community that does this? I mean, so there's, having an actual connection to what cities are doing it is a lot better than saying, well, half of them do and half of them don't. It's very clear to look at what cities have an expectation of their livability and the way that they want their town and to feel and look.
So for the final meeting, Pete, can you bring us back a detailed list? Absolutely. So that we can use that to help make informed decision. Anybody else?
If I may, I have a final comment. On the owner occupancy piece, it's interesting that many code violations have to be initiated by a complaint. And I understand we're not at random going to go out and police these things, but You know, the possibility of a neighbor calling the homeowner who has moved out and rented both pieces on his property saying either straighten that renter out or I'm going to make a complaint on you. That's a pretty powerful tool. So I'm not sure I want to take that away. I don't see it happening, but it could happen. So either get back here and square these people away or you'll face a code complaint.
Yeah, but I mean, and not to argue against what you just said, but we have the same issue with single-family rentals being used as drug houses or crime houses or whatever. That, you know, it requires complaints to the police department and surveillance and all sorts of other things to take care of those things. I don't know. Like I said, I'm still on the seesaw on this one. So. Anything else on this for tonight?
I have one question. Can someone clarify if Senate Bill 1051 will overrule neighborhood CCRs?
Yes.
Can you clarify?
Senate Bill 1051 required that local governments allow ADUs in every zone. But it did not say that that ADU authorization trumped CCNRs. So, and I view CCNRs as a private agreement between property owners to not engage in activities that they privately agree to. That's a separate contractual arrangement that I don't think 1051 abridged. I think it could have abridged it, like I said, prospectively, but it won't affect existing CCNR arrangements. But I don't think it does that.
And by virtue of that explanation, what you're saying is if somebody were to put in an ADU in the area that had covenants and restrictions, the onus would fall on another individual who lives in there to bring suit, not the government.
Or the homeowners association themselves.
It wouldn't have anything to do with Oregon City.
Government, right. Okay, anything else on this?
Can I ask some clarifying questions for next steps?
Yes.
Okay, so there's those three issues. It sounds like we want to think about those issues a little bit more before you make a final decision. Is it okay if we assign that final decision will happen at the next meeting, which is January 28th? I can reach out to both the South and the neighborhood associations associated with.
No.
Okay, you want to do this at the very end?
Yes. So
Okay.
we're going to take all the issues that we can't come to consensus with, and we're going to do like maybe meeting 5. We'll be discussing all of those and making a decision one at a time on each of those, and then one decision to take care of them all.
Okay, so we will add to the list for March 20th, the discussion item, so we'll presume everything else in this package is fine. The items that we're marking for final discussion are the removal of the concept plan, single-family design standards, the parking number of off-street parking stalls for these units that we've discussed, all the types, and then also the owner occupancy requirements for ADUs. Is anyone missing anything? Okay.
No. But before we go there, I realize staff brought these big 3 to us, but you know, I assume everybody looked at all the rest of the stuff. Are there any other detail issues in this code section that somebody wants to talk about?
Just one.
Yes.
And it is street trees in chapter 17.14090. It looks to me, I was looking at the red line version, and it looks to me like all the residential landscape, front yard landscaping requirements were removed. And I was surprised by that. Can you tell me about that?
Do you want to? Those front yard residential landscaping requirements required a certain minimum square footage for a front yard to be actually grass, and then it had and shrubs. And so with each new house, a builder would fill out a calculation of how many shrubs and how many square feet of lawn. Thing was, most developers and builders that we talked to said we would do that anyway if we were going to sell a house. And it seemed they were okay with the tree requirement, but they did feel like the residential landscaping component was a little onerous and an overreach in the code. So as part of, streamlining and removing barriers, the idea was to take that piece out. and keep the tree requirement.
Are we concerned that, that there could be a builder that just wouldn't even landscape it at all? Or is that pretty much not,
Well,
not?
I would expect
a
that
worry.
would be between the builder and the homeowner, a civil matter myself, but at the same time, most of the subdivisions that we see with most of the bigger developers, they're going to be doing that.
I've been in.
And the planning commission agreed to that? Because that
Yes.
weighs a lot for me,
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I've been in some form of construction for close to 30 years. I put alarm systems in over 1,000 homes in residential new construction, and I never saw one house that was sold without landscaping.
Oh, great.
It just doesn't happen. It's sort of like buying a car without tires.
Okay, and I have just one more. That's concerning the manufacturing home code. Can the current manufacturing home parks be grandfathered in under the new code?
Absolutely, yes.
So
And
they
the
would
new
just-
code would allow them to even add units and expand.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they
Won't
would,
need to be grandfathered, right?
They-
Or they become permitted uses.
okay, well,
Yeah.
however you want, yeah.
So there's no,
Yeah, that's
whatever
right.
non-conforming status they have right now, they become permitted uses, which is better for them because that allows them to expand and have a little more flexibility
Yeah.
about altering the way they're laid out.
And-
Security.
And will help to maintain, it would make it less likely that a developer would come in and buy out.
Yeah.
But they're not wholesale protected though.
No, they're not protected.
They're not protected.
Well, they're protected to a great extent by state law that came out 5 or 6 years ago, right, Pete?
Well, the difference between, when you say protected, there is the separate city ordinance about relocation and notification, but that's the same thing as you have a list of permitted uses in that zone.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing. It's a
yeah.
bet. Yeah, okay.
Well, protecting them would be to have a manufactured home park zone and those properties be zoned for that. That would be protecting the current ones that we
Right.
have.
And that's what we're doing, correct?
No.
No, the current proposal makes them a permitted use in the zone, and so
This makes them legal.
Right. I mean, it makes something that's already been there legal, and that does help in the sense that, if you have somebody coming through and like thinking about targeting that property for redevelopment and it's not a permitted use, then you're probably going to get a pretty bad appraisal back from the bank and say like, that park is just not sustainable. It's not even a permitted use. And so we have a lot of concerns about it, and therefore that could, I'm not a development, economist right here, but could support, some conclusions to redevelop the park, to demolish it and say it's a non-conforming use, we just don't want to deal with that. So making it a permitted use would help, some of those appraisals come back. But as you state, a manufactured home park zone in which only manufactured home parks and perhaps a very small subset of other uses are permitted, and by definition, other things such as redevelopment to townhouses or apartments is explicitly prohibited, would better protect that use. And that is a balance of uses and property owner rights for city commission discussion and the project advisory team and planning commission. Aside from some scope and logistical issues of revising the comprehensive plan, also felt that issue of balancing property owners' rights and removing other development opportunities was a step too far in their recommendation, which isn't to say that the city commission can consider and come up with their own conclusions as well.
Do you have something else besides that?
Yes. Well, one, on the manufactured home, I would like to consider removing the 2-acre minimum, just because I don't think it is particularly important or adds anything useful, so I'm not sure why we would add it. So again, it's a minimum 2-acre size lot that I don't think provides use. I'd like for us to revisit the 20-year age for internal conversions. We've received a lot of comment about it, and I think it'd be a good discussion for our commission. So it was on the slides, maybe it was gonna come later, but yes.
Is that it?
Yes.
I just have one minor thing about subdivisions and street trees. Currently, the way the code is laid out, if because of the physical constraints of a particular subdivision, they can't put in as many trees as would be required because of, whatever reason. The developer has to pay an offsite or pay for trees that they can't plant anywhere. Why does that make any sense?
Well, we have this requirement that you have to plant one tree for each 35 feet of property frontage on the street. And so that's the calculation that we run for the entire public street frontage. And then it was a way to treat all applicants fairly and make sure that, we weren't just letting some developers off the hook and that sort of thing. The money, the money goes into the tree mitigation fund and can be used for planting trees citywide. And I think at the time that proposal came forward, the Planning Commission supported it. There wasn't any discussion of just eliminating the remainder at that time.
Yeah, one thing it does do is it incentivizes developers to not put either wider driveway approaches or utility boxes in places that would prohibit a tree. So if we just said, try the best you can, then we may see less street trees than we see today, where we say, you gotta put in 35 trees, whether you're planting them on site or, you have to show that you can max out the number of trees with our spacing standards now, and the rest you put in the tree fund. And so, it has been good revenue for the tree fund, I will say, but we only see it like in bits and pieces because most of the time they're going to pay for the tree. It's going to go in front of the house because there's the association with street trees and property values.
Okay. All right. So
So I'm unclear on how we want to move forward on those three issues: the removal of 2 acres. Oh, sorry.
If you guys want to debate that tonight or bring that back.
No. We want to, what we're doing in these 4 meetings is sussing out the things that we want to finalize at the end. So any of the 3 things that either Commissioner Hyde or Commissioner Smith or any of the rest of them, then put it on the list, and that will be the beginning of the discussion on the last meeting.
Okay, there's no easy ones we want to cross off the list and just include or not change?
I didn't hear any easy ones tonight.
I didn't either.
We consistently split the vote.
But it's just the ones that we've brought up that we want to talk about.
Right.
Everything else is fine.
Everything else of this is off the table after tonight.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
And, you don't want to say off the table. The record is
It's still on
open.
the table till
So
last meeting.
it's not, we're not closing the public record.
Right, we understand.
Stop being a lawyer for a second. That was a comment between the 5 of us.
So I'm going to, if we can, when we get to the end, I would like to summarize those issues just to make sure that I am 100% clear on what they are.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go there.
So it's the, looking at the single-family design standards and as they relate to the concept plan areas, parking as it relates to low-density residential, and then owner occupancy for ADUs, removal of 2-acre minimums for manufactured home parks, and then the age for internal conversions.
What about front yard landscaping that was identified by Commissioner Hyde?
Front yard landscaping
No, I
as well?
think she
Or
has
is that-
Yeah, that was the
Okay.
answer. That's fine.
Yes.
And
that was
street trees
answered.
is settled too? Okay.
And
I would
then,
like the option to bring up street trees later. I asked about this and Laura, you or Pete told me trees were coming back up on March 6th, so I did not really study the
They
street tree
are,
issue.
Yeah, they're
yes,
coming back.
they are coming back on March 6th.
Okay.
so the only other mission that you two have is to take the design standard thing to Park Place and the South End neighborhoods and make sure that, to the best of your ability, that you get that information out into the neighborhoods so that it's not just 5 people showing up to make a decision about, this at that neighborhood.
As we exercise no control over neighborhood associations, I will reach out to them and make sure that it is a concern of the
I
commission.
completely understand, but when we say public engagement, I want public engagement to be more than one couple who shows up.
Me too.
All right. Then, unless somebody has something else, we're done with this item.
Are we asking for a continuance to a date certain?
And, I need a motion to continue this discussion to
February 6th?
date certain of February 6th.
Move to continue this discussion to February 6th.
Seconded.
Okay. Further discussion, call roll.
Commissioner Nancy Ide.
Aye.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Mayor Holliday.
Aye. Last thing is restroom replacement park project at Chapin Park. Phil Luce isn't here. You can take it?
I'm running with it.
Okay, let's make it quick.
Thank you, Mayor, evening commissioners. We are requesting authorization for the replacement and installation of a new restroom building for Chapin Park. The purchase price for the restroom is $327,858.58 and authorized and budget expenditure for the current fiscal budget. We used the Keystone Purchasing Network authorized by the state, resulted in a savings of $11,500 on this contract. As you're well aware, Chapin Park is one of our most used parks. Sees quite a bit of usage with the ball fields, recreational facility, playgrounds that are there. It was the restrooms we believe were in the 1970s when they were constructed. The current building is between the parking lot and the children's playground equipment, and it would be replaced in that similar location. I don't really have a whole lot more to add unless there are specific questions as it relates to the contract with Rome Tech to complete the replacement of the facility.
So the only reason this is up to us is because it's over the $50,000 spending limit?
Correct.
Is there a motion?
I have one question.
Okay.
The proposed scope has section 5 on page 3, I think. And it's all the stuff that the vendor is not providing that I presume the city is going to have to pony up, to use a very casual term. Is the city planning for those things? Like, have you guys discussed those items and feel comfortable with them?
Sorry, I get to it right here. Talking about the exclusions under general exclusions.
Section number 5, page 3.
Not by Rome Tech.
Yep.
I have not discussed that specific exclusions with the director, having known that the department has constructed previous bathrooms that they've built. My full expectation is that we are going to provide those.
So we're gonna level the existing building, we're gonna provide the building pad, compaction.
That is my understanding.
I have to assume that staff has done their work and they've looked at all this stuff and they're, so if it's in there, they've done their due diligence to say that, yeah, we're providing this. I mean, I've done, 100 contracts with public agencies where, they're gonna supply certain things and that's why we put the exclusions in the contract.
I can have Director Lewis at our next meeting provide an update on the provision of the exclusion identified requirements in
It's
this
just a
contract.
check before we spend $327,000 that we've crossed all of our Ts and dotted all of our Is. I'm sure we have, and I'm sure the staff's looked into it. So that's the reason, just double checking before because there is an expense to that. And I don't know what that amount is, what that expense to the city that we're agreeing to that goes along with this $327,000. So that's it.
What's the consequence of us delaying this till February 6th?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay, then is there a motion to continue until February 6th?
Motion to continue this item until February 6th.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Further discussion? I think for me, just out of respect for our new commissioner, that we ought to let her get her questions answered before we do this, as long as there's no impact to schedule or costing or anything. So let's call a roll.
Can we?
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, come on.
No, Mr.
He was
Lewis,
trying to get an
we will
answer.
provide the exclusions items. He didn't provide any cost associated with that.
Now, let's go ahead and do this. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Nancy Ide. Aye. Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Mayor Holliday.
Aye. And if Director Lewis wants to weigh in on a subject, he should be here, not via text. Because I think that's what just happened. Right?
Understood.
Okay.
They have other commitments representing the city as well.
No, I get it, I understand that. And this hasn't come up very often in my first term, but when someone brings an item to the city commission, they should be able to anticipate, 95% of the questions that might be asked. And to be honest, I missed that, and it's a pretty good question as far as, so $320,000 isn't all it's costing us to build this restroom. So at least at minimum, it should have said, this is the contract part and this is the amount and so the total amount is this.
Agreed.
So moving on, Commissioner Smith, you wanted to pull something from the consent agenda?
8D, just a question.
Okay. 8D is Portland General Property Transfer to the City of Oregon City. Mr. Conkle, I guess you're gonna have to take this one.
I think Mr. John. I'm going to try.
All right,
Some
okay.
information on this.
So it's just a basic question. On the site map, there's no reference to the pedestrian bridge, which I assume is ODOT.
That's
that
correct.
connects to that same piece, right?
That's correct.
Is there an easement for ODOT that's there? Because that's not on the map. So it's just a generic question do they have an easement too?
So part of the reason why this came up was because of the Rockfall project.
Okay.
When we were doing the Rockfall project, it was what came about was that the fencing that reaches to the top of the bank is actually on city property. So when we discovered that and we started looking closer at that, the ownership issue down there, we realized PGE owns a piece of a strip of land right there, which it looks like based on the map that includes the area where you're talking about where the bridge is. It spans that area. So the bridge abutment is likely on this piece of property.
But that's not an issue.
Well, we're actually, there's a follow-up item on this, which is an IGA with ODOT.
Okay.
That's going to come too. This here is about ownership. PGE owns that piece of land, has historically. We also want this charter protection on this piece of property. So all these things kind of came together at once. ODOT was trying to do their project, needed access. We realized that we had park property there, our pathways on that piece of property. And so we reached out to PGE, and this agreement's about doing the exchange.
Okay.
They still have some facilities on that property, so they still need easement rights. So we're giving them an easement. But at the end of the day, we will own the property. They will have an easement. We will work with ODOT to get an agreement over maintenance of the things like the bridge and the fencing. So that's what this is about.
Okay, but the ODOT thing will come to us again later?
Yeah, we'll have to bring that back. We've been waiting
all I
for
wanted.
it's not only this piece, but we have it all along most of the promenade.
Okay, so
That's all I needed.
with Commissioner Smith's question answered, then we will take the consent agenda as a whole. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Call the roll.
Commissioner Nancy Ide.
Aye.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Mayor Holliday.
Aye. Mr. Manager, you have anything for us tonight?
At our last meeting, there was some discussion about the city attorney and whatnot. We're prepared to talk about that tonight if you would like.
City attorney.
There was a question.
Privilege and
Privilege, communication, confidentiality.
Yeah.
At the work session.
Public
sorry.
records.
Yep.
Why don't we do that at the retreat?
Let's do that.
The city attorney will not be at our retreat.
Could we?
You want to do it at the next meeting?
Yeah.
Meeting?
Yeah.
Happy to do it.
Okay. Anything else?
That's all.
Anything, communications?
No.
Commissioner Smith, you have anything for us?
No.
Commissioner Smith?
Nope.
Okay, we're adjourned.